"Who's in my bed?" A father went to say goodnight to his 7-year-old son, very well knowing that if he didn't his son would have trouble sleeping. It was a nightly routine between them. He entered the dimly lit room where his son waited under his blanket. With the first glance the father could tell there was something unusual about his son tonight, but couldn't put his finger on it. He looked the same, but had a grin that drew from ear to ear. "You okay, buddy?" the father asked. The son nodded, still with a grin, before saying, "Daddy, check for monsters under my bed." The father chuckled a bit before getting on his knees to check, only to satisfy his son. There, under the bed, pale and afraid, was his son. His real son. He whispered, "Daddy, there's someone on my bed." The cabin. A hiker decided to go on a hike by himself. Something he was not very used to. The whole day was normal. Trees and bushes engulfed his surroundings. He enjoyed being outdoors in the mountains. Nothing seemed strange to him. That was until he was making his way back to his car. He figured an 8-hour hike was good enough. The sky was already getting dark and they needed to get back fast. What was odd was how much he didn't recognize the trail back. He began to panic. Night had already taken over and all he had was a flashlight and no clue on how to get back. He knew it was already too late and too dangerous to keep going through that perilous forest. He began to worry that he would have no shelter for the night when almost luckily enough, he stumbled across a broken down cabin. It was dark and seemed like no one had visited it in years, but he knew it was the only place where he could rest until daylight, especially since his flashlight was running out of battery. He knocked on the door a few times but no one answered, so he let himself in where, strangely enough, a perfect bed fitted for one person awaited him in the center. He knew that if the owner came back he could explain himself. He was sure that the owner wouldn't mind, or was even probably dead. So he went ahead and got himself comfortable in bed. As he tried to sleep, he couldn't ignore the collection of paintings around the room. Portraits of strange-looking people all peering at him, each wearing a smile that sent chills up his spine. Not too long after, his exhaustion from the hike got the best of him and he was able to ignore the faces. The next morning he got up early and was shocked to see that there were no paintings around the room, but windows.
The red wristband. A doctor was working at a hospital where the patients were tagged with colored bands. Green, alive. Red, deceased. One night, the doctor was instructed to get a few supplies from the basement of the hospital, and so he headed to the lift. The lift doors opened and there was a patient inside, minding her own business. Patients were allowed to roam around the hospital to stretch, especially those who have stayed long. The rule was to be back in their rooms before 10. The doctor smiled at the patient before pressing the number for the basement. He found it unusual that the woman didn't have a button already pressed. He wondered if she was heading to the basement too. The lift finally reached the floor where the doors opened. In the distance, a man was limping towards the elevator, and in a panic the doctor slammed the elevator button to close. It finally did and the lift began to ascend back up, the doctor's heart pounding. "Why did you do that?" "He was trying to use the lift," the woman stated, annoyed. "Did you see his wrist?" the doctor asked. "It was red. He died last night." "I would know because I did his surgery." The woman lifted her wrist. "He saw red." She smiled. "Like this one. White with red. A man just moved into an apartment and heads to the receptionist to get his keys." The receptionist gave him the key with a smile, but warns him not to disturb the door with no number on his floor. He wondered why but didn't bother to ask. He was too busy with his new apartment to care. After he finished unpacking, he began to get curious. He questioned why the receptionist would warn him of such things, and so he stepped out of his apartment to check the door with no number. He tried the doorknob first, but it was locked, so instead he got onto his knees and peeked through the keyhole. The apartment he was looking into was empty. His eyes scanned the whole place before stopping at a woman standing face against a wall in the corner. He noticed her pale skin and long black hair before stepping back, suddenly feeling perverted in a way for invading someone else's privacy. He brushed it off, assuming she was someone that did not want to be disturbed. The next day he got more curious about the woman and eventually went back, straight away getting onto his knees. He peeked through the keyhole and saw all red. He assumed that the pale woman must have caught him peeking the last time and covered the hole with something red. He left the door alone and instead went down to the receptionist to ask her questions. The receptionist sighed and asked, "You looked through the keyhole, didn't you?" He admitted to it, and so she felt obliged to tell him the story. She told him that a couple used to live in that apartment a long time ago, but the husband went crazy and killed his wife. However, this couple wasn't normal. They had pale skin, black hair and red eyes. It wasn't a little girl. I was camping with my husband and his family at a small, remote lake in New Mexico. There were about 10 people in our group and another group of 6 people in the next campsites. It was nighttime and both groups were doing typical activities, making s'mores, having a few drinks and telling stories, when we all heard what sounded like a little girl yelling out for help. Neither group had children with them, but we were all positive we were hearing a little girl and decided to search the area we heard the noises from together. There was a field behind our campsites, and we all saw a very tall, pure white figure standing maybe 100 ft away from us in the field, making the noises. We all agreed this thing looked maybe 6 feet tall, skinny, and white as can be. We made our way closer to investigate, but whatever it was that we saw started backing off as we got closer, and it disappeared into the trees. All night we continued to hear a little girl calling for help as we tried to sleep. The unrest stopped. I was driving across country with my mom and sister when I was 16 and my sister was 20. It was late, but we were well rested still and alert. We were driving along an interstate and needed gas and a bathroom break, so we stopped at the only rest stop in 200 miles. There was a van full of teenagers on a road trip at the gas station, as well as a small gray car parked at the pump in front of us with 2 young men standing still outside of it. When we got there, everything felt wrong. We'd been on the road for days and seen many rest stops at night and had never been afraid until then. My mom and sister went inside and I stayed in the car. I heard the teenagers say they were creeped out and couldn't get the pump to work, and they left in a hurry. I was watching the car in front of us, and the 2 men had not moved at all. Not an inch. They weren't talking. They weren't on phones. They were just standing there, still as stone. This is a true story. We were staying in this fancy hotel for my cousin's wedding. I was 12. I woke up to a rough shove, assuming that my sister was waking me up. It was early morning, about 7:30. I groggily stepped out of the bed and was hit with hairspray fumes. I heard the sound of someone taking a shower, as well as loud hurried footsteps and repetitive spritzes of the hairspray can. I walked to the dresser and pulled out a blouse and a skirt. As I got dressed, I heard knocking on my door. I pulled my top fully on and opened the door. There was no one there. I was kind of freaked out right now, but I knew that it must be my imagination, as I was about half asleep at the time. I exited the bedroom. I heard the shower shut off as I passed the lavatory, then my father's heavy footsteps. At the end of the hall, there was another restroom. I heard repetitive spritz coming from there and called to my mother. "Hey, Mom, I need to pee," and Dad's in the other bathroom. I heard my mother's voice. "Alrighty." It was definitely her voice, but alrighty was not something she had ever said. I rolled my eyes and walked away. I figured that I should wake my granddad, as I heard heavy snores coming from the room that he was sharing with my parents. I wondered why my parents hadn't woken him up. When I opened the door, I was scared to see that the room was empty. Just then, the noises and the smell of hairspray stopped. I ran downstairs and saw that my roommates, Dad, Mom, Granddad, Clarissa, were already eating breakfast. I checked my watch and saw that it was already 10 o'clock. My mom stared at me. "Wow," I thought. My sister then said, "What the heck?" I asked them what was wrong. My sister then said, "You literally just went to the bathroom and pointed to the lavatory next to the small kitchen area." I walked over there and pressed my ear to the door. Sure enough, someone was there, washing their hands. I shook it off and counted my fingers. 10 of them. I wasn't dreaming. I knocked on the door, and inside the bathroom, I heard my own voice, calling out, "Alrighty." I looked over at my parents, sister and granddad, who were all pale. Behind my back, I heard the lock click, followed by my own voice saying, "Hey there, Sarah," and footsteps. I turned around just in time to see my own feet, dressed in my black velvet flats, turning the corner on the staircase. I felt paralyzed with fear, and goosebumps crept up my back. I wasn't able to move for about a minute, before I told my family all about what had happened a few moments ago. My sister told me that yesterday, when she woke up, I wasn't in my bed, but she heard noises coming from the bathroom. When she went there, she saw me walking down the hall in my pajamas and called out to me, but I kept walking. When she went back to my room, I was still sleeping in my bed. She freaked out and didn't tell anyone. Fast forward to 2 years later. My cousin now has a 6-month-old baby, and we're talking to each other over tea. I told my cousin about what happened to me and my sister, and she froze. "That happened to you too," she said. I felt the goosebumps return to my arms and legs. She then told me that she had woken up and had walked downstairs when she saw her fiancé, now husband, sitting at the table, eating cereal. He greeted her, then said that he was going to get something from upstairs. It took him some time. Eventually, she felt sort of concerned and went to check on him. He was asleep, still in his pajamas.